White text over video of past events. Logo, Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium. Professional Development Series presents Intro to Captioning, the who, what, when, where, why, and how. A stage with two screens set up side by side. Left screen is projected slides, right is live open captions. In front of the screens, on audience level, is a table with 4 chairs. A woman is seated at the table. Opposite her is another table where a woman types at a laptop with a stenographer's machine. At right, a man sits on the edge of the stage and addresses the audience.
My name is Evan Hatfield. I work here at Steppenwolf. I'm also a member of the Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium. I just want to thank everybody for coming out this afternoon. This is a really, really nice showing, especially so close to a holiday. I also want to thank some folks that made this possible this afternoon. Steppenwolf for looking the other way and letting us use the space. Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium, as well as the League of Chicago Theaters for sponsorship and putting the event on. Equip for Equality for making the captioning possible. And Robin, I apologize, your last name? I'm going to let you handle that one.
Robin Chimniak.
Just like it sounds. For providing the captioning. Who's been to a CCAC event before? Fantastic. For those of you that haven't, thanks for trusting us. Something as we go into the next couple of hours that's really good to call out. We want to acknowledge that the world of accessibility, especially as you're first tiptoeing into it, can be pretty daunting. Maybe some of the concepts seem a little sensitive. You're not sure if you can ask questions. We just want to acknowledge that, and own that this is a really safe meeting today. And so if you have questions or thoughts, please don't be shy about sharing them, so long as they're rooted in respect. If you're not sure about terminology or something, it's all right. We'll help you through that. Also, is anyone brand new to the accessibility world? Cool, that's fantastic. There's about 6 of you that are really new to this. If you come across terms or concepts over the course of this afternoon, I think rather than raising your hand and asking for clarification in the moment, because that can be quite a rabbit hole we can go down, we're going to point you to some folks that you can check in with at the break in about 45 minutes here, who will be really happy to patiently walk you through some of the things that we've covered. Steering committee, could you raise your hands real quick? All right, if you look around, anyone with their hand in the air right now is really happy to be Yoda to your Luke Skywalker. Luke Quywalker. There it is. There it is. Any other housekeeping that I'm missing before we dive on in? Christina or Lynn or anyone? A couple of things, what the afternoon is going to look like. We're going to spend about 20 minutes as I walk through a basic overview of captioning options as they currently exist and are employed here in Chicago. We'll touch on a couple of technologies that exist in the world but maybe aren't being used in Chicago so much. Then we'll turn it over to Rachel Arfa, who is going to walk us through what a good experience is like when it comes to using captions from a patron perspective. If all goes well, this will last about 45 minutes, at which point we'll take about a 10-minute break. It's a chance to stretch legs, get your blood sugar back up, and then we'll come on back in, and Mike Shaw is going to lead a panel through a conversation about how folks offer captions at their respective organizations, both the successes and the challenges. And folks, if we could, a great facetious slow clap for Brad Aiken from Steep Theater coming in the back. First things first, a little bit of acknowledgement that Chicago's in a really exciting place right now because, first of all, there are this many people in a room on a Wednesday afternoon who are concerned about captioning and making it easier for people to come to their organizations. Specifically within the theater community, we've seen a real groundswell in the last 6 months of really small organizations who have taken it upon themselves to start creating do-it-yourself captioning options in-house that kind of offsets the cost factor and allows them to bring more people into the theater. About 5 years ago, there's only maybe 2 or 3 theaters that were offering captioning as part of their seasons. Now, I think we're at about 10 organizations that are giving people lots of options to check things out. That said, I don't think anyone in this room is an expert on captioning. I don't pretend to be. I don't think anyone else does either. So when we talk about what works, we're talking about what we figured out over the course of anywhere between the month that we've been doing captioning to, in Stepwolf's instance, 5 years that we've been doing it. I also want to acknowledge that, as with all accessibility initiatives, it's really about your audience and the type of art that you present, the budget that you have, the space that you have, the technology you have access to, that really creates the correct solution for your space. And so as we go through this, we really urge you, figure those things out and work really closely with your audience to figure out what is right for your world. We're mostly going to be focusing on captioning for theater and performance over the course of this, but there are tons of concepts that can be applied across a variety of disciplines to other arts. And finally, we're going to be talking about the mechanics and execution of captioning today, not marketing, funding, or getting institutional buy-in. They are crucial topics, but we'll have to cover those later on. At the conclusion of the workshop, we are going to have about an hour of happy hour out in the lobby. The bar will be open at that point. That's a fantastic opportunity to check in with people and find out how they've accomplished those things at their organizations. To define real quick, does anyone know the difference between open captioning and closed captioning? One hand goes in the air. I'm going to give it to Martin to try to answer that.
Open captioning would be a situation where everybody in the audience can read and see the captions, whereas closed captioning would be delivered to a subset of that population through any number of different technologies or means.
That's not bad. That's what I would have said until about 20 minutes before this started, and I Googled it just for kicks. And one of the things that it called out was that in open captioning, users don't have the ability to turn the captions on or off. Closed captioning has the ability to turn them off, on and off, whether that's on a television set or on a handheld device. What we're working with right here is open captioning. It's viewable by the entire audience. An example of closed captioning were to be if someone were, if Matt were to have captions up on his laptop right there, and he was the only one who was able to see them. Who uses captions? Everyone. You know, the classic examples are people who are deaf and are comfortable reading text. The hugest population are people who have lost their hearing later in life. That's kind of our bread and butter audience, all those boomers who are slowly aging and don't quite realize why they can't hear the actors on the stage anymore. I use captions whenever I watch anything on the BBC or The Wire. I don't have them on the entire time, but I'm pretty much constantly rewinding, putting captions on, figuring out what Bubbles said, and then turning it off again. People who use English as a second language. Ben at Oracle, you guys just had a cool experience. Where you at? You just had a cool experience, right? Where you figured out there was an audience using captions that wasn't necessarily associated with hearing loss.
It was our first.
Let me hand you the mic real quick.
It was our first evening where we were trying out captioning in our space, so it was very experimental in the first place. The tickets had already been sold out, so we weren't even sure if we had anybody from the community of audience members who may have been deaf or hard of hearing, which was who we were trying to target to bring in, but we ended up having 5 or 6 students who did not speak English as their first language, and they said that it was the best thing that they could have had that evening. So.
And Jason from Chicago Shakespeare, you get the comment, right? That people enjoy using the captions for Shakespearean text, just helps them get through it a little bit better. Anytime that we use, we have actors with using Irish accents, the entire audience uses captions. Kathy?
I was in an AARP meeting recently, and I guess they figured mostly old people may be hard of hearing, and it wasn't a movie or a play, it was a meeting, and they used it, and sometimes the typist couldn't hear it either, and I forget what word you use when you can't make it out? Inaudible. And in that instance, it would have been nice every time she typed inaudible if the speaker repeated it, because if she can't hear it, who can? And I'm going to suggest that if you're not in an uninterruptible thing, try that.
What's funny though is that if it was inaudible to the captioner, then it was most likely inaudible to the rest of the audience as well. And so, equal access. Am I missing any groups, folks that know the captioning serves? Environments in which you can use captioning. Anything where there's sound, live performance, movies, video, both on site or online. Do you have any YouTube content? The millennials love YouTube content. Yeah, you do. Is it captioned so that everyone can use it? Lecture and presentation, like we're in right here. If you're a theater, you do post-show discussions in addition to the play. Are you captioning your post-shows? Tours? Again, I invite anyone. Am I missing anything here? The media that can be used to present captioning, like we're using today, projection screen. A handful of theaters around town employ LED displays. Think Kino numbers at the bar or super titles at opera. It's about a 1 foot by 4 foot digital display. You can adjust the colors so that they're red or they're yellow. They feature about 3 lines of scrolling text presented somewhere near or on the stage. Lifeline Theater is using a flat screen television, thoughtfully selected, which Erica will talk about later during the panel. People can use their own personal devices, such as a smartphone or an iPad, or a personal display that's provided by the institution, like the iCaption system that Leslie Shook and DePaul University use. There's instances of captioning being done on Jumbotron at sports stadiums. You could probably get pretty creative with an overhead projector. Looking Glass Theater arrived on a really elegant solution for one show they were doing where they couldn't quite figure out how to present captions for this one sequence. And so they did that using a butcher paper and easel and having it written down and then just scrolling it through. Analog and old school, but sexy as hell. And then there's the idea, and this is really exciting for all of the small theaters that are here today that can really control that design process. Do you add in the captions after the production has already been baked and out of the oven, like we do? We have to put LED displays on the side of the stage. Or do you get to incorporate those into the production because you can control the design process, ensuring the best possible line of sight for the patron? Scripted versus unscripted. A lot of theaters that do scripted performance go through a process whereby they'll take that script and they'll upload it into whichever software they're using. so that over the course of the performance, they don't have Robin typing furiously, trying to keep up with all of the rehearsed text. That's an operator who is cueing that text up, hopefully as closely as possible in sync with the dialogue, sound effects, music, as it's presented over the course of the show. Sorry, our social media guy, Jimmy Freund, is here. I'm just going to own that real quick. And so all of a sudden I became aware of the fact that I'm not just talking to 40 friends, I'm talking to
thousands worldwide.
There's the option for scripted captioning where you have the captioner who's actually queuing things up as it goes along. There's also automated options where you can kind of sync up or hook up the caption presentation to, say, the light board or the sound board. And so as you go through the performance, every time a light cue is called, that also shifts the captions along. I never ever use notes for anything, so this is kind of tripping me out right now. For unscripted performance, like we're clearly doing here, that's where cart writing comes in. Man, where's my note on cart? Communication access, real-time translation. Is that right? So that's where we get someone with very dexterous fingers and a really trippy science fiction-y like keyboard who is keeping up and typing in the text, the speech as it's offered. This is appropriate for presentation, lecture, stand-up comedy, improv, or any production that has scripted elements, but also unscripted ones as well, where something calls for audience response, or someone coming up on the stage, or moments of ad-lib. For cart, you can go with on-site, like we're lucky to be doing here today, or you can do it remotely. That involves a variety of technologies, but basically speakerphone, decent phone connection, and some Wi-Fi. Does that sound about right, Rachel?
Yeah, we just need could you hear me? You would just need something to be able to view the captioning on. It could be a laptop, an iPad, an iPhone, or another mobile tablet that has access to the internet.
What are the pros of using that system, and what are the cons of doing remote cart?
The pros of it are that you could schedule in a short notice if you need to, because the captioner does not have to try and schedule the travel to where your meeting is. It's usually a little bit cheaper. And you do, like for example, I use remote captioning at work because we have a lot of conference calls with our other offices, so people will just call them, so the captioner is just another person at the phone, and they send arrange their meetings with an iPad in front of me. The con of it is that they could speakerphones. I mean, how many people enter a meeting at a speakerphone? Everybody has, it's hard to hear everybody. Now imagine you're trying to capture everything that we said at the speakerphone. So it does a challenge. So very often the captioner will miss information, just like other people at the speakerphone. So the kind of that thing it kind of affects the quality of the meeting, especially if you have other different kind of hearing people participating. If you have different kind of hearing people participating in the meeting, if you want to have captioning, I recommend that you use an on-site captioner.
I was at an event a couple years ago. It was the HLAA Walkathon? Is it HLAA? Walkathon? And so it was an event in Lincoln Park, and it's outdoors, and so not necessarily an environment that you would think you could put up a caption display like this. And what they'd rigged up for that event was they had a remote captioner who was listening to the proceedings and then doing her magic on her end, and it was getting transmitted to personal devices. And so people had the opportunity to be in Lincoln Park on a lovely fall day, engaging in a walkathon, being stripped by unruly dogs, and having a chance to actually, that was a dig at Rachel and she totally missed it.
My dog is fine. My dog's name is Drama. And he's fine. He's just not a dog person.
I don't think anybody at that event was a dog person. Lots of deaf people with bruised shins and leash burn on their thighs. Boy, that was a digression. We sped through that overview pretty quickly right there, which is fantastic on my end, because that means we can then move along. But then I also want to make sure that we're covering things in a productive way. People that know more than I do, is there anything you would like to add to this? Who's not a patron, please? Anyone from the presentational side? Beautiful. This means we're going to have more room after we've gone through everything to really dig into things if people have more questions. Rachel, would you like to describe what goes into a good patron experience?
So yeah, the work this over to me event, so she want to make sure I understood. Okay, hi everyone. So, thank you for being here today. My name is Rachel Alban. And I've been to many of your theaters and programs, so I really appreciate that everybody cares about providing open captioned theater performances. And I also have a hearing class, so if you need me to repeat myself at any point, it's okay to interrupt me, because Evan didn't have people to interrupt him, but I'm fine with it. So the first one of the things that I am going to start off with is, so I'm going to talk about what makes a good captioning experience. Is first I'm going to talk about is really what part of, I'm going to get into the details of what makes a good captioning experience, but part of it is your customer service, your back office really plays a big role, and I'm going to describe some ways that because the theaters that I have the best experience are the theaters that do caption it well, and they provide a thoughtful experience. There's one theater that I go to where the captioning great, the placement of the screen is okay if there's no customer service at all. So I only go if there's a show I'm excited about. I don't go if I'm not interested in the show. But the theaters that have good captioning and awesome customer service, I will go even if I think I'm not interested in the show. So that's how much of a difference it makes. It's almost like that brand loyalty. If the customer service is what gets me to come back. So some reason the box office could do a good job is from the very get-go treat your box office staff. So when I buy tickets and they say I'm going to come to the open captioning show, the open question will be, what are you asking for? The open captioning show? Oh, what day is that? There's one open captioning show that you are offering, and you expect me to tell you that. Why is that? I think it's not that hard. If I can figure it out, you can too. So it's always nice when the box office staff knows. But if you have more than one date, then I wouldn't understand that. So make sure they know the days and the times the open caption show, in which section I should be buying tickets in the price. Many dinners providing access price, so make sure that you do staff and entertaining at them. You also want to make sure that you've checked out the seats, and that you see seats for people who have hearing class, so that they can best be the captioning. I'm going to talk about line of sight right now. Do these come out as names? So I'm going to talk about line of sight issues, and this is this is one of the most important things that you could do, because you're the study over here and you're trying to see the captioning, then it's obvious that you did not think about your line of sight issue. They see the captioning screen is here, and you decide to put seeds on that side. That's going to make it hard for somebody to see this screen. And you also want to think about the having the placement close to the action. Sometimes theaters like to put their captioning screens over here. Could you guys see me? But there's all this action happening at this stage. That's not going to be a fun experience for me, because I'm going to be watching a tennis match going from the action here to over here, to over here, to over here. So you really want to come and test it out and think about where the screen placement is going to be, where you can put it in. That helps to make that a good experience, so that people don't come out with whiplash after the show. So the other thing that you got to think about where you place the screen is thinking about lighting and any obstructions that may be in front of your theater. I remember Mike, you and I had a conversation about this theater, if you were talking about where to put the screen. And there was at your beautiful set, there was a lamp that was in the middle of the set. And sometimes you turned on, and sometimes you didn't. And you got to think about where somebody is sitting and how that lamp made black accents and how that light made black accents. So that's something to test out too. And the other thing to be aware of is the actors' movement. Sometimes actors' movement will black was bees and at the screen. Again, back after that is to have two screens, so that even if there's some extra movement at one end, you still have another screen at the other end. And we also could work with the actors to make some kind of modifications. Another great way that I personally think would be great to have in Chicago is to work with a set designer from the get-go and think about how to incorporate the captioning screen and where you're going to put it. There's no rule that says the captioning screen have to be all the way at the corner, but about incorporating a bite in the middle, like saving that spot with the picture frame, and then for the caption show, take out the picture and put the caption screen. I think there's a lot of ways you could be creative with that, but you have to have that good relationship with your set designer. Maybe take them up for some tweaks and get them to do it. And then another thing to keep in mind is that you got to make sure that you balance the different access needs. I want to talk about what happened with East of Eden with the captioning screens and other access that you were trying to provide.
We ran into this really supreme irony where we started using two caption displays, one on either side of the stage, as a solution for what Rachel was talking about. We spent about 4 years trying to find the perfect spot for one caption display, and always just butting our heads against scenic design that had not been considerate of the technology. And again, this is the point that I love to make for small theaters, where your designers are part of your ensemble. They do live in town. They don't fly in from Brussels to do your show and then leave again. You can actually mix that into the batter at the outset of the process and pull off some very, very cool things in a way that larger theaters, we've got some stuff going for us, but we're just not that nimble. And so we're constantly trying to figure out where we put the caption display. So after years of that, we started going with 2, one on either side of our proscenium in the downstairs theater. Not perfect, but that allows guests to know that this is where the displays are consistently going to be, regardless of production, and then they can start to go and pick their seats accordingly over the course of a number of shows. What makes that work is our ability to cheat the caption display in, tilt it in a way that it can be seen from the other section of seats on the other side of the theater. And I went in just before, or just after the house opened for East of Eden, and saw that the caption displays were pretty parallel to the theater, which means if you were sitting on the far side there, you couldn't really see the display over here. And when I went to kind of clear my throat and inch up to it and nonchalantly lean against it to tilt it, because there's already people in the theater, I realized I couldn't. And why I couldn't was that our shotgun mics that our amazing sound engineer had put into place for our assistive listening system and induction loop were bracketed right there next to the caption display, completely preventing it from tilting anymore. I learned another lesson that day.
Yes, thank you for that. When you got best applications, you try to make it work. Sometimes you do run into problems, but you do the best that you can. So another point I wanted to make about this is that people like options. Everybody here chose your seat. People have different preferences. You also people like to sit at the right or the left or the middle, but many times we're captioned seats. People that only have an option of one side of the theater versus the other. So we test out where caption display to see where else they could be. I've always placed out one side of the theater, but I personally really like to be in the middle. But VIP theater and set up their seats to be in the middle. I would say Jason, Chicago Shakespeare has a really nice theater to really be part of it. But you guys have a unique setup in your building. But it's nice just to be able to have options so you're not having the same experience in every theater from be at one side versus the other. But people like to sit out different places. They would probably want to sit wherever you don't put the caption seats. But some reason for that is that sometimes people with hearing loss can hear better out of the right ear with the left ear, so they want to sit in a seat that optimizes listening from that ear. So this goes, this is obvious, but make sure the whole seat, it makes sure that the seats that you use will actually conditioned for people who will use them, so that they're available. Any questions about that? Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through some specific captioning detail, we deconstruct the captioning. So I'm going to show a video with some caption, and then I'm going to highlight some issues. This is a clip from a Stop Room play here, Who's Afraid of Virginia Room. I don't know if anybody see that. You saw that? Yeah, if you people have, you recognize the people that they show, but this show also has special meaning because it's the very first play that Stop Room captured here in 2011, is that right? So that was probably like Stop Room TV worked and so many other accents. You really expanded out of the accents since then. He built a huge capacity audience in a relatively short amount of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this video and then go back and we can talk about them.
I think it's colored our whole life. Really, I do. It's an excuse anyway. It's what he uses for being bogged down anyway, why he hasn't gone anywhere. And it was an accident, a real goddamn accident.
Okay, so that was these examples, and now I'm going to go back and go over some of the captioning mistakes. There, oops.
I think it's colored our whole.
Okay, so first, the first leak is then here, the batch size is too small. You don't want somebody to be squinty the whole time. That's not going to be fun. So make sure to test out the placement. I actually had it happen once where the theater did not reveal the size yet. It was kind of awkward. I had to stand up at the beginning of the show. We could find the house member.
We apologized.
It was you. And the picture here today. I'm just going to give up the hope today.
Really,
So the other thing is that here the batch size is too big, and one of the challenges with that is that when the batch is too big, it means that you can't get as much text to the line, it means that when you put this dialogue onto a line, you have to move it faster, which gives the audience person less time to be able to look at the dialogue and then watch the action. So I'm sure everybody has seen closed captioning on TV. So the way that most people with hearing loss watch closed captioning is that you're not really going to see me, that you read a book where you're studying. You're just looking at that information fast enough. You should as you can at looking at the action, so you should want to get as much information when you look at that look back at the main action. So if you think of it like that should help.
it's an excuse anyway. It's what he uses for being bogged down anyway, why he hasn't gone anywhere. And it was an accident.
So here, if you notice out of these three, the captioning have been inconsistent in terms of size, in terms of placement, and so you better make sure to be consistent, and that way the audience member got this set up in their mind. This is what it looks like. I think a good analogy is your car keys. When you come home at the end of the day, you should put a car keys in the same place so that you know where to buy them. But if you put a car keys, if you just drop them, like I do, you can't buy them the next day. They will spend a lot of time looking for them. But with captioning, you better make sure to keep it consistent so that when somebody looks at that screen, they know what to expect. They know what they're going to get in terms of dramatic size if we are not focus your eyes. Any questions about that? Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about
he uses
some distractions, some other things that may be distracting that you don't need to put in, you will be aware.
for being bogged down. Anyway, my answer.
So here, George walks down the stairs in the background. That's a stage instruction. You don't need to put that in. You will see that George is coming down the stairs, so you can delete the stage instructions for them. So here's another stage instruction that you could delete because you could see the action happening. And you should have another issue here. This is another distracting issue up here. Who's more? I can move that smoother, right past the word more. But the caption is displayed for such a short time. He becomes distracted because he started to think about who's that, what it means, what's happening. So it's good proving that when you go through to spell check. So there's another example of misspelling where it could be distracting. I'm just going to go back for 1 second. So here, this line was broken up. It should have opened on 2 lines instead of 3. You can see the term here, so there's never. Make sure to keep it all together because it adds something. It adds another line. So keep the consistent number of lines that you want. Because split it up, you may not remember what happened on the previous sentence. Okay, so another example here.
What you're after? What are we going to have? Blue games for the get?
So right here, George is not talking. You don't need to have this up here because if you see that in a separate screen, the person is going to see it out of the corner of their eye. You think, does that mean somebody is speaking in the word, keep missing the action that's on the stage? If nobody is saying anything, you shouldn't have any words at the stage so that you can look at this action that's happening here. So there's no reason to keep that kind of placeholder. Okay, so the next topic I want to talk about is suspense timing. So this is challenging if you're doing PowerPoint type caption. How do you put up just enough information so that you maintain that suspense that's about to happen? And you don't want to ruin it. For example, you don't, if there's a high pressure suspenseful movement, you don't want to put up the next 2 to 3 minutes of action because that's going to ruin that emotion of being sitting at the edge of your seat. So I'm going to go back here.
Down. Anyway, Ronnie hasn't gone anywhere. And it was an accident, a real goddamn accident.
So here, the caption showed that Honey started screaming, but the captions were displayed before anything had even happened yet, so that to the audience members, something was happening or about to happen, so we didn't match up. If there should be, this is a moment that has a lot of action and physical comedy, so display that she was screaming ruins the emotion that you should be at that moment. So here, what happened was the rose powder then was displayed for too long. It stayed at the screen when instead there could have been an opportunity to come back and put Honey continued to shriek so that you capture the other auditory sound that's happening. So you could show that that's what people are listening to, then Honey is still reacting at this moment. So here's another moment where there's not enough information displayed.
In a while, you like that?
Yes, I've never been so great.
This is quite a gadget. You like that?
So here what happened was Nick was talking about your brother, and he said, this is quite a gadget that was not captured here. You basically edited the play because you're not providing that same access to what's happening, because here we're trying to analyze each of the Brewer characters' response to this weird situation. If by not capturing that, you miss out on that piece of information that he was saying. So that's important to try and capture as many lines as you can. So here,
That's what you're after. What are we going to have? Blue games for the guests?
so here is an example of the caption moved too fast. Did anybody see what he else said? I mean, it just moved too fast. I'm just going to go back and play this again.
That's what you're after. What are we going to have? Blue games for the guests?
So here, if you're looking at the stage, you're trying to watch what's happening. If you are not looking at the screen, at the captioning, at that precise moment, you could have missed that entire exchange. So you better, for that example, you better put more of the dialogue or 2 lines, and you have more than enough room so that the person could look at that dialogue and then look back at the action that's happening. So that's a caution not to make the lines too short, because you better hope the person maximize what they're looking at. So that's all that I have to now I'm going to play a good example.
I think it's colored our whole life. Really, I do. It's an excuse anyway. It's what he uses for being bogged down anyway, why he hasn't gone anywhere. And it was an accident, a real goddamn accident.
And so that was a good example. You see some different things. I mean, we try to fix a lot of these mistakes, but it's always a work in progress. It's always trying to catch up with the clean. But so that corrected a lot of the examples that I talked about. Any questions about them? Yeah, Chris.
Is there a certain number of lines that you would recommend as a maximum up at one time?
We're going to hold on for a second. Christina's going to run mic for anyone asking questions.
I'm wondering about a maximum number of lines showing at any one time. Like, is there, 4 lines, 3 lines? It looked like in that better example that was sort of a maximum of 4 lines. But I didn't know if that was just dependent on the size of the display and whatnot.
Yeah, but I don't think that the answer is set still, but I think that the answer is going to depend on what environment you're using the captioning and what kind of equipment, how far it is, the placement and all of that. But I invite anybody from Dina to talk about how that, because you've all had to make decisions about how much text to display. So.
You don't use your voice for 20 minutes, then you forget how to talk. I'm going to put Jason Harrington from Chicago Shakes on the spot because he has the unique challenge of dealing with Shakespearean text, and they've come up with a pretty unique solution for that.
Yeah, we're in our 3rd season of captioning, and we've learned a few things. We use a projector. It's an 8x2 screen, and we end up shaving off either both sides or one side, depending on how the set works with the screen placement. Initially, and Evan talked about this with the LED, I think all of them or most of them do a scrolling effect. On our screen, it wasn't. So a line would appear at the bottom, you'd be halfway through reading that line, it would jump up to the top, and a new line would appear below it. And that was really challenging. And so what we work with a company called C2, and David, the gentleman who runs that, learn much better about, all right, well, if we want to, and like Rachel said about spoiling the joke or presenting information at an appropriate pace, starting with that line at the top, and then if we wanted to couple it with the next line, to leave that in where it goes, and the second line comes up below it. So in terms of the amount of language, and just like Rachel said, it's very, very specific to our theater and the kind of screen that we use. 2 lines, maybe 3 is usually where it lives. And then another thing we learned, I think, and people who use the LED, correct me if I'm wrong, but from David, the timing is different. Where I think an LED screen, the way that he times it is there's a bit of a delay. So when he hits go for that next slide of language, and where our projector is much more immediate. So it took him a couple of goes to get his timing down as well.
My question is this. We do a number of plays that depict people with different accents and who use language differently. A lot of times, the playwright and what a hearing audience is getting about characters and about story and about place depends a lot on people pronouncing words incorrectly or using words incorrectly or using slang. I noticed that you pointed out in the example of what not to do with captioning, misspelling words. How do you, and obviously you don't speak for all audience members who use captioning, but how do you feel about using kind of imprecise English or improper language to try and get that across? Is it helpful? Is that not helpful?
I have an answer for that, but I wanted to see if the theaters wanted to pitch in on how they address that.
I would say, to start off the answer, I think you honor the text and you honor the intention of the artists. And I think part of that is making sure that your credit rating with your audience when it comes to formatting and spelling and punctuation is platinum, so that when there is a departure into a misspelling or slang or a homonym or wordplay or anything else like that, they're trusting that that's deliberate and not just sloppiness. Does anyone want to build on that? I'll keep going. I think that it's also appropriate, before I hand it back to Rachel, to give people any heads up about a script or text in advance. just like there might be notes in the program about where that playwright is coming from and what they were trying to achieve. I think that there's really interesting, mostly unexplored territory in exploring like that vocalscape, that soundscape with this audience in advance. Can I go to Monty, then Rachel? And then I think we're gonna say this was a fantastic end to the first half. As soon as we wrap this nugget up, we'll take about 10 minutes for a break, get our blood sugars up, and come back in and really dig into it with the different
I just wanted to mention something really great. So I just wanted to add one more point about sound. Then you gotta think about how to include sound effects like lyrics and upstage sounds. You gotta make sure to include that in the caption to give people the access to the same thing. You also gotta think about putting the lyrics from your sound, the lyrics from the songs out there too, especially if there's a connection to the action that's happening on stage.
Monty, bring us home.
I think what you've been saying about artist intent is really, really important. I think that sometimes the person who's creating the caption is not always directly involved in the rehearsal room as we want. So we just have to, especially those in the artist department, need to make sure that the captioning reflects that. So for example, we did the who and the what over the summer, and to say something as big as Middle Eastern music is not as good as, say, Pakistani or whatever specific culture we're trying to reflect in the scenic transition.
I think that's a perfect thesis to end on for the first half here. So I was really, really excited about Rachel's component, just to be able to sit down for 30 minutes and have someone who uses the service walk through and talk about some of the nuances. I think I'm equally excited about hearing from this group of folks we have in front of us, all of whom represent theater companies from here in Chicago. I'll allow you like I'm the god or something. It would be great if you guys could introduce yourselves in a moment here. Where I think I'm the most excited about today is we're starting to see accessibility in Chicago treated in the same way that we're seeing design and playwriting and acting, where we have all of these organizations that share actors, designers, writers, and they work all over town at the small theaters, the big theaters, and it's this ecosystem where people are just constantly trading ideas and art and learning from each other, and that's what makes Chicago an amazing theater town. And what's exciting about this panel right here is that there's 4 theater companies who have taken upon themselves, with a minimum of resources, to think better of themselves, to really dig into the nuances of captioning, and now we get to totally hear what those ideas are and then steal them. So that said, I'd like to introduce Mike Shaw from Writers, who will be facilitating the panel.
Great. As Evan had mentioned, my name is Mike Shaw. I am with Writers Theater, and I'm thrilled to have the rest of the folks here with us today. Well, let introduce themselves.
I'm Monty Cole. I am the Artistic Programs Manager at Victory Gardens Theater.
My name is Ben Foxen. I'm the executive producer for Oracle Productions, and I told her that I would tell everybody that I'm here in place of our newest member of the staff, our Director of Accessibility, whose name is Havla Grace. She wishes she could be here, but she was unavailable today.
My name is Erica Foster. I'm the Operations Director at Lifeline Theater.
Great. So we've got a few different people here from a number of different organizations. As Evan and Rachel have discussed earlier, there's obviously a lot of different ways to do captions. Open versus closed, the number of different technologies that are available, and one of the most important factors are audience members, the reason that we are doing it, as everybody else has been saying before, providing the opportunity to engage, for those audience members to engage with the art being performed on stage, and that the artistic integrity of each production is being shared with every member of the audience in a unique, or in an even and equal way. So, with that being said, as there are a number of different ways to provide captions, different technologies, I'd just like to start off by asking you guys, how do you present captioning at your organization? As each space and audience is unique and very different, how are you guys doing captioning? What technology did you choose and why?
Yeah, so we are the tennis match theater, as Rachel mentioned earlier. No, we're working on it. So in the past, we've had the captioning on different set pieces. Lately, we've moved it to one wall that's really, really close to the stage. That's diagonal from the stage, and it's pretty large too. Because we found that patrons have kind of requested it, and anytime we've had it anywhere else, they go, no, back there again. So having consistent space for that to happen has been really important to them. We use a projector. We put it in the back of the house, and then we set up a table in the back of the house with that's plugged into just a regular computer, and we play PowerPoint right off of it. That's about it. The only new thing that we've done recently is that we found that we started to do post-show discussions for all of our performances, and that it's kind of unfair that those aren't captioned. So for captioned performances, we also have our post-show discussions use CART now, which is really great. So we quickly unplug it from one computer and head into the next one.
Great, thank you, Monty. Ben or Erica, would either of you like to speak about the technology you use and how you provide captioning at your space?
So at Oracle, we do something very similar to what Monty does with Victory Gardens. It's building a Google slide or PowerPoint presentation and then throwing that up with a projector and having somebody at a computer running that. The one thing I'll say with Oracle is because it's a smaller space, and we seat about 50 people on average, and because we move the audience around, but not during the show, but from one show to the next, we may have them sitting on both sides of the space, or we may have them only sitting on one side. We do, as Evan talked about, we do build it into our design process in terms of figuring out where the captioning happens, and it's been very rewarding. Monty's actually directing our next show at Oracle, coincidentally. And so we're looking forward to working, especially with the set that he's coming up with. It's bizarre. But we're looking forward to figuring out exactly what the optimal experience will be for those audience members who want to use the captioning service, where we want to put it, how we want to do it. So it's kind of changes for us every time.
At Lifeline we use PowerPoint as well, but we use a flat screen TV. We have a small space. We seat about 100, and there's not a lot of room on the stage to put up like a stand for the TV, so we mount it onto one of the walls, either stage right or stage left. We've kind of figured out the two spots on stage right and stage left, so the designers are told about that, and so they take that into consideration when they're doing their scenic design. Maybe someday they will just blow me off and I'll have to put something creative up and figure out a new space, which would be fun, right? We then run that to the booth, which our stage manager booth is on the side of our theater. And you can't really see or hear as the captioner, so we use our assisted listening devices to listen. And I check in with the stage manager and just to make sure that words are on the screen out there. Otherwise, it's kind of flying blind. It's scary.
And actually, something else I can throw in there, because I think Google Slides has been mentioned once in here. We've actually gone from using PowerPoint to Google Slides lately because that way it actually can be a collaborative process creating slides, creating captions. So it's not just like my intern and me, it's actually also the assistant director. It's also, it becomes a cool process where multiple people at different stages of the artistic process can join in make the captions real good.
Great, yeah.
So how does that influence the captions themselves?
1 second, I'm gonna bring you a microphone for that real quickly, 1 second.
Yeah, so in that collaborative process, how does that influence the captions themselves? Or does it influence the text of the play?
Yeah, so I feel like the first step usually is an intern just kind of puts the script into the captioning, which is a very basic form of captions, right? So it's just the script is in there. Technically we can go on tomorrow, but it doesn't have all the sound cues. It doesn't have that the actor is actually screaming at this moment, and that's not necessarily in the script. There's different things that, or even sound cues that are added in the final preview. Things that get added in throughout the process that the intern, when they first put in the script, the very first draft, never could have known that. So to have someone at each step of the way kind of be able to edit it and take another look at it, I actually even, to be honest, sometimes I even put the Google Slides on my phone and I'll sit in the back row of the house and go, yeah, it's looking good so far. No, that's not gonna work, no. And take notes as we go along, just to make sure that's A-okay.
Great, thank you. At Writers Theater, we also use PowerPoint and flat screen TV. We've had one caption performance so far, a production last season, the Daria Van Frank. And with that, we used 2 different flat screen TVs. As Rachel kind of mentioned earlier, when we took a look at the set, the blocking, a chandelier that was hanging in the middle of the space, that if we were to put a caption screen there in the center, a chandelier would have blocked it. Also taking into consideration, that was a point where the dinner table was, so there was a lot of group blocking happening in that area, and there was concerns that perhaps an actor's head might block captions at a certain point. So then we, again, continue to take a look at where's the best place to put this. And the way that set was designed, it was best to get 2 different flat screens on opposite sides of the stage, so no matter where the action was taking place, there would always be captions right in with that line of sight. Another question in the back, 1 second.
Can you guys talk at all about, I know we're looking at maybe doing a projection thing. Can you talk at all, I know there's a wide range of projectors out there. Can you guys talk at all while we're talking about technology about anything you've come across in terms of what to avoid or what to look for as far as projectors go?
Sure, yeah. It kind of depends. So lately we've also been doing this sort of resident access theater program where we've had Straw Dog in the rehearsal room with us. We're actually going to now have the New Futurists join us in January to present their first, Too Much Light Makes Baby Go Blind, an accessible performance of Too Much Light, which will be really cool. But in that sort of situation, we're just projecting on our black wall, and we're using a kind of small, relatively cheap projector. When we are working in the ZMT, the Zajic McVeigh Theater, the larger theater, we're using a much bigger projector, and mostly it's for lumens, just to make sure that it's bright enough that it can actually hit the other side of the stage. And honestly, it's not even, I think the one we use is probably not bright enough. We just got 2 new projectors through a grant. Hopefully we'll be able to use for captions, but really it's about range and about brightness that you can really get out of it.
Are you asking about Steep specifically, Brad?
Yeah.
I would say that for projector-wise, maybe look 2,500 to 3,500 lumens would probably work. And if you get an HD projector, I would make sure that you work with a projectionist so that they can show you how to set up your slides so that the words are big enough. Because sometimes in Google Slides it gets weird if you're dealing with like an HD slide or an HD dimensions versus a standard definition dimension, and like how that makes the slides look and so on and so forth.
it changes, like, it'll change the dimensions of the slide, and it changes where the words fall, and it get weird.
Yeah, and we also have found that then when you're actually doing the projection, just like the gentleman from Chicago Shakespeare was talking about an 8-foot by 2-foot projection area, the projector is going to throw light above and below it, even if the light is the color of black. So you'll have to figure out a way to to cover the excess so you don't have any spillage. And that you can't buy those, you just kind of have to figure out how to do that, which is also probably good for working with the projectionist. And then we've also, at Oracle, we've had the most success projecting using white text on a black background. Even if you're projecting onto like a white surface, we found that it looks better than the opposite. But that, you just gotta experiment with it. And for Oracle, we're projecting onto weird surfaces too. We're not doing it onto like a screen. That's just out of necessity though. So.
Okay, great. So obviously testing is really important for what you're doing, and I think we've heard we've got 4 different spaces and 4 different ways at these different spaces that is happening. So there really is no one fit solution, one answer for everything. Even every proscenium theater is going to be different based on that specific space and its audience space. So that's all very important, and so I think we see that there's a lot of different technologies, and it's really important to really examine your space and your people and the need there. So now that we've talked a bit about choosing technology and why we chose technology that works for our space, let's say that we've taken a look. All right, we want to do captioning, and we've chosen what we think technology works best for us. How do we schedule a performance date? How do you guys pick that? Do you pre-schedule your caption performances for all of your shows? Do you do it on a demand basis? Is it when we receive a request? How do you do that at your organization?
So we have an access subscription that we have, where it's a really cheap subscription for patrons within the disability community. And so we try to keep those dates pretty consistent as to where they land in the run of the show. And then, and this is the problem really, and then we cross our fingers and look at the League of Chicago Theater's access page and hope that it doesn't land on anyone else's dates. So the problem is making sure that one, it fits with our subscribers' schedule, and you're not changing it up every time you announce a season, while also making sure that it doesn't run too much into other people's schedules around the city.
Yeah, and we also, the first year we did it, we picked Friday nights, and that's our least attended shows, because nobody wants to go out after a long work week on a Friday night. I mean, I fall asleep, personally. So then I decided this year to choose Saturday afternoon, since that's our most, popular time for performances anyway. And so we switched them for that reason, and then also looking at the league's everyone else's dates to make sure we weren't conflicting.
Yeah, that league website, by the way, if you've never seen it, or the webpage that has the calendar is up at the chicagoplays.com. There's a link that says access, so that's pretty easy to remember.
It's literally chicagoplays.com/access.
Yeah. And for Oracle, one thing that goes into it, we're general admission, so our whole box office situation is slightly different than if you have actual reserved seats. So we try to pick nights that have some times where it's popular, but then also times that maybe there isn't a lot of other theater going on, and certainly not theater where theaters are having access nights specifically. Oracle does Monday night performances, so we'll pick like one of them will be a Monday night, just in case that works better for some audience members who want to use it as opposed to a Saturday night. But we try to switch it up and make sure that we have a variety of evenings options that people can choose from. We also have to wait a couple weeks into the run just so that we can finish the captions. Since we're doing it all just from kind of a do-it-yourself mentality, so it just takes us a little bit to get there.
Also, that all being said, we actually recently did change access dates. From last season to this season, we changed where they sort of land on the run. And so this year, I mean, actually, it's actually really interesting in many ways, and I can talk to you guys about it later. But it lands in such a way where all of our services end up happening on one night. So there's one night where all of our services happen, as well as there's other nights where different services happen. But the reason why we did that is because we had certain patrons complain that, like, hey, why do you guys just have your services on the last 2 weeks of your run? If I have anyone I want to suggest this play to, I can't do it. So we moved them back 2 weeks so that, yes, it makes us have to work faster in terms of building captions and everything else, but it does allow people to actually encourage word of mouth and see the play later on in the run.
So yeah, it sounds like a couple of things that are really important there is obviously, again, your audience. What's one of the most important things to all of us is our audience members. So, what are dates and times that they want to attend to the show so that you're making it convenient for them, because that's going to be a part of their overall experience. Also, the number of mentions of the Access page on the League of Chicago Theater's website. Partially, we don't want to compete with each other, but it's also it's a big part of that is providing as many opportunities as we can for all of our audience members to take part in these services. We don't want to make sure that every theater in Chicago is scheduling their captain performances on the same weekend. We want to make sure that there's plenty of opportunities for every member of our communities to be able to enjoy these productions.
One other thing that I'll add as well, in addition to the League of Chicago Theaters, specifically for captioning, since oftentimes we want to offer that to audience members who may be deaf or hard of hearing. Within deaf culture, there are, in the Chicagoland area, there are comedians that come through, or different music artists or different entertainment acts that will come through, different events that happen where the population of audience members who may be deaf or hard of hearing, you got to look for those nights as well, because they won't come to your play if the what's the comedian's name? I'm thinking of a comedian specifically. He came into town one night that we were thinking of doing captioning, and we decided not to, because so many of the audience members that we knew that we could come already had booked tickets to go see this comedian. So it's there's Facebook pages and things of that nature that you can join to keep in the know of what's happening in deaf culture.
Another great point at really keeping your audience in mind and focusing on their needs is great. Thank you. One thing that, now that we'll move a little bit forward now into kind of working on those captions and providing them for our audience members. Something we talked a lot about during Rachel's presentation was line of sight. And for all audience members to be able to view the captions and the action happening at the same time, to try to avoid the tennis match as much as possible, so that those audience members that are utilizing the captioning service have the same experience as those that are not using it. So can anybody here want to talk about how or where specifically you present your captions and why you've chosen that location?
Yeah, like I said, we're a pretty small space. We only seat 100, and when we first decided to do this, I called our resident scenic designer, Alan Donahue, and he and I sat. We had a little fake TV that was 40-inch piece of cardboard, basically, and we put it up in various positions in the theater, and we sat in all sort of different places to make sure we could see it from either side, also make sure that our accessible seats could see it. So if anyone had a mobility disability that also needed the captions, they weren't, left out in the dust. And so it's about 8 feet high in the air, about 6 feet upstage. So for us, if you're on whichever side of the space that gets put on stage right or stage left, that means like our second to fourth rows have the best line of sight, because it's almost eye level, and so there's not a lot. There's just a little bit of this. It's not quite the tennis match. So then I hold those seats for people who need the captions.
Great, yeah, thank you. Anyone else want to talk about anything thing that went into that decision-making process of where they go, maybe who in your organization that you work with, other people on staff perhaps that may need to be involved to get that type of setup, and you know, even whether or not the captions are designed or incorporated into design process, or where you bring that into the process at your place.
Yeah, I mean, that wall is also where our ASL interpreter is, and so on nights where we have our ASL interpreter, it's kind of great to have the two of them there next to the captions. And as I mentioned before, the consistency of that space. And honestly, our space is large enough that it's not as much of a head movement as much as an eye movement still, but it's still something that annoys the hell out of me, so we're trying to fix it. In terms of who I work with, I'm in an interesting position where I work in artistic, but I also work a lot in production as well in my position. And so it's mostly me and our master electrician / building manager, Tom Albright, that put the event together.
Great, thank you. We kind of have talked about, you know, a few different staff members. Production, for example, has been brought up. Can anybody talk about who manages the program at your facility and what kind of staff commitment is involved? Maybe along those lines, like what does kind of your start to finish process look like for who you need to incorporate in and when, and how that works for you in your space?
So I'll speak from Oracle's perspective. I think that we're maybe the smallest organization represented here. We did just appoint a director of accessibility, Howell Grace, that I mentioned earlier. And she is working right now on building a schedule for the entire year so that we can understand exactly what the budget needs to look like and all of the dates that we want to put together. And for us, it made the most sense to have somebody to just be in charge of that piece of the puzzle at Oracle, especially since our mission is to make theater as accessible as possible. And we have this business model that we call public access theater. So we are expanding our definition of that to make sure that we understand it even more. And that's what she is responsible for solely. And that I take direct inspiration from Victory Gardens, what Monty's doing at Victory Gardens, and everything that Rachel and Evan have already shown to us, and everything that the entire community has been throwing out there this year with ADA 25 and just seeing all of the inspirational things that have been happening. She has a budget to bring in people or to hire contractors from outside, and she's just going to kind of manage that. But this is very new for us, so we're kind of figuring it out as we go along.
Mike Irvin and I run the Access Project at Victory Gardens. Mike Irvin is an incredible activist, playwright, and community engagement consultant for a couple theaters actually. And he created the Access Project about 20 years ago. So a lot of accessibility and disability services and the services that we provide in our theaters are because of him. He's incredible. And what we've done lately actually is started to figure out how we can build out the team that is him and I. So Brian Balcom, who is an MFA director at DePaul University, has joined us on our team. The three of us have a weekly meeting where we talk about everything from services to programming for the disability community. And how can we continue to build that? So now we have a house manager who's
to just tackle it full on, whatever it takes just to make it happen.
I have a question for everyone, really. So we've got our main stage shows that happen, and we've talked about captioning for those, but what about other events? How do you do captioning and other access that extends out to anything else you might do, readings, things like that? I know Oracle does B-sides, which are a different production structure. What do you guys do for things that aren't more traditional theater shows?
We're working on it. There's what's kind of cool is that, as you build that audience, you get more requests for it, right? So we had our Ignition Festival this last year, And not only did we have captions for some of the shows, I mean, I don't know if you guys saw First Look, but they also did some cool captioning stuff here, especially for Philip Dawkins' play. But we also had some requests for ASL, and we had such a great relationship with our ASL interpreters. We've been using them for the whole year for every show, that they were like, we'll do it for free. Yeah, we're just going to volunteer our time because Victory Gardens has treated us so well. So, yeah, it's one of those things where I think you kind of have to master your main stage theater and start branching out, and I feel like we're all kind of in that process of how do you start branching out to your other programming.
I'm going to hop in real quick, because I can. I think what Monty's talking about is exactly it. You start with the thing that really drives your organization. Maybe it's not all 5 productions, maybe it's like the big one that you know everyone's going to want to see. And you do that once, and you do it really, really well. And then you get feedback, and then you talk to the audience and figure out how to do it better. And then maybe the next season you expand that to 2 plays. And then you get the heart of what it is that you do down. And then you start branching out to other streams of programming. We've been doing captioning for 5 or 6 years. We didn't offer our first caption performance in the Garage Theater until a month ago. And I'm not saying that's right, I'm not saying it's wrong, but it was a really exciting moment for us to slowly reach out in that way.
I would just really echo that. Currently, Writers Theater, we're focused on trying to provide an open captioned performance of every production in our season. We have not expanded into any additional programming, lectures, post-shows, conversations, those types of things yet. But it's something that I definitely want to look into. And so with that, again, for me, is evaluating the space that those events take place in. Some of them are in our theater right now, some of them are in a basement of a church, some of them are in other places. So it's figuring out, okay, do I set up a PowerPoint and can I bring in a screen, or is this post-show after the captioned performance and I can leave the TVs there? Is it, more of somebody is coming in and giving a speech on a topic related to the production, and I may want to go with a cart option? So again, it's going to go to evaluating what is my space, what is the program, what is my audience. But just like Evan said, really focusing on my bread and butter to make sure that I'm meeting the core needs of my constituents. And then as those get met, more questions are to come up, and people are going to start asking, oh, can you provide these services here? Which just gives me even more gumption to push harder to make them happen sooner.
Yeah, I don't know if you have noticed yet, but captions is really labor intensive. So while I have I'm working on captions for our next show. For example, we had this great reading last night, and I wish we had captions for that. And then I'm thinking, what time would I have had to do that? To create captions for that show, as well as do casting for the organization and other things. So I think it's also about just looking at your resources and who do you have around. And if you do have someone who's like, do you have anything that you could be doing right now? What if you built captions for the small program that we have coming up? Then you can use it. But yeah, it's all about what do you actually have, what resources do you actually have to make that happen well.
And with the evaluation and looking at the resources, next year when your organization is putting the budget together, just commit some money to it as well. Do some research to find out how much it costs maybe to bring somebody in to help with it, if you just want to give them a small stipend to help with developing a PowerPoint, or do some research and find out how much it costs to have a cart service or to have an ASL interpreter. And ASL interpretation, there's a difference between when you have somebody who's doing the show and somebody who's doing live interpretation. So you just got to do some research and find that out. There's a lot of resources in this town that you can draw from. Find out how much it costs and just see what you want to build a budget for. Commit some money to it. Come on.
Great. I think we've got a comment or question from Rachel over here.
I just kind of wanted to add to this conversation about to put the visuals in. I completely agree that if you're going to start somewhere, you should start with the show, because that's going to provide the most visually interesting experience. I went to a reading earlier this year, my first reading ever, and I'll be honest, if you buy the script, it's cool, it is cool. There was nothing to look at. It's just a bunch of people on stage, and I appreciate the value of the reading, which is that you're experimenting with, but you don't have the exact timing set up aligned to music. So you can think outside the box of a kind of accommodation to provide the actor that you're reading from a script. So it's okay to get the audience member a script to and then invest resources in making the shows that are really polished, accessible. So I hope that helps you with thinking about Irish over the top with the best, awesome stuff that's, getting written up, and then work away down from there, be creative with your accent solutions.
Great, thank you, Rachel. In the interest of time, we're going to need to go ahead and wrap this up now. If you could all just join me in thanking our amazing panel for sharing their experience.
Fade to black. White text on black background. Intro to captioning. The who, what, when, where, why, and how. Presented by Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium and League of Chicago Theaters. For workshop resources and more information, visit chicagoculturalaccess.org. Presenting speakers: Evan Hatfield, Monty Cole, Matt Bivens, Aaron Apteker, and Rachel Arfa. Workshop accessibility: real-time captioning by Efficiency Reporting. Video editing, captioning, and audio description by BridgetMelton.com. Video fades to black.